I had people come to kill me 2 times, and they're all dead. I'm the only one who is left alive. Hi, my name is Jack Parker, and I'm a lawyer here in Kyiv since 1991. I had people come to kill me 2 times. The first time, it was drug addicts, heroin. The second time, it was Savlohov brigades, racketeers from our neighborhood. They came to me on a Friday night, and they said, "Cars have accidents, lightnings strike, you have a wife, think about it." And that's when I knew I had 2 choices. Either you leave Kyiv, or you get yourself protection, you get yourself some security. Now, it's 30 years later, and they're all dead. I'm the only one who is left alive. My story is about corruption, a business practice that was started way before Jesus Christ himself. Having moved to Kyiv in 1991, I was fortunate to live through times of when unique opportunities arose, when ordinary people like me became billionaires overnight. And the saying in those days were, so long as there's bribery, you can count on justice. Now, more than 30 years has passed. There's no more bandits. They all became part of the government. Now it's really big-time corruption. Trust me, I know what I'm talking about. My name is Jack Parker, and I'm an American lawyer here. I've lived in Kyiv for the last 30 years, and this is my story. I wrote it in a book. The Steel Barons. I tell you, it was a rough beginning. Well, Steel Barons, Chapter 1, How I Ended Up in Kyiv. Well, it's a strange story, and it's not a very pretty one, but it's what happened like 30 years ago, so I can tell you what happened. When I arrived to Kyiv, I was living in tourist hotel, and there was a bar downstairs. So one night I went there, had a little drink, and that's when I met her. And this girl was gorgeous. I mean, absolutely beautiful. Her name was Yana. She came over to me. She didn't speak very good English, but we did have quite a lot to drink. And then, one thing led to another. We ended up back in my hotel room, and everything was well and good. But the next morning, when I woke up, I found out that the bitch stole everything I had. She stole my watch, she stole my wallet, all my money, all the credit cards inside, everything. And then to add injury to this whole thing, next few days I felt a very strange sensation, when I was going to urinate. So I figured, damn it, the bitch must have infected me. And I went down to Podol, there's a venereal clinic there, and the doctor ran some tests, and that's how they said that I had syphilis. And it's a contagious disease. And then they had to quarantine me for a month. And then they put me right there. And of course, when I came out of that, my wife Julie, she found out about it, because the doctors informed the American embassy, and the American embassy informed my wife and my job. I was fired from my job. I couldn't go back anywhere. No more America for me. Everything was taken away. So that's how I stayed in Kyiv through the venereal clinic. Fortunately, I met Sergei there. He was also spending time for the same thing. And we became good friends, but I tell you, it was a rough beginning. What I didn't know about Antonio was that he was part of New York's Gambino family. Steel Barons, Chapter 2, How I Got My First Client. I still remember when I walked into the office for the first time that I rented, and on my desk I had a Soviet phone, rotary dial, I had a Soviet lamp, I had a fax machine with thermal paper, and then walked in my first client. It was a walk-in, it was no appointment. Antonio. Antonio Garibaldi was American-Italian, but he worked in Budapest. And in Budapest, he was managing lottery operations and a couple of casinos. So he wanted to do the same thing in Kyiv, and he needed an American lawyer. Since American Embassy recommended me, he came straight over to me, just to register a company in corporate work. He paid me $5,000 advance retainer in cash. I loved the guy. It was really good. I mean, I really needed the money at the time. What I didn't know about Antonio was that he was part of New York's Gambino family, that they were already running everything in Budapest. They had not just casinos, they had prostitution, they had everything. I didn't know anything about him. Here, they wanted to run contraband cigarettes, in addition to everything else. I didn't know anything. I really wish I did before I took that client on. That's how we became billionaires. It was an accident. Continue with the Steel Barons. Chapter 7. How we became billionaires in less than a year. Well, I could lie. I could tell you that we're all geniuses, that we're all gifted, and that's how we had the sense to... No, that's not true. In reality, a guy named Alexei Glushko, he showed up in my offices one day, and he was working in the State Property Fund. He was one of the analysts there. And he knew I was an American lawyer, and he thought that maybe I would know American companies who would invest into Ukrainian privatization, in particular steel mills. I didn't. But he explained to me the whole deal, and I liked it a lot. There was 3 factories that he was actually offering. One was Makiivka Steelworks, the other one was Azov Pipe Plant, and the third one, which he said was the beauty, was Ukrsteel Metal Plant. And he was going to buy them for privatization certificates. That was his plan. Now, let me tell you about privatization certificates. In Ukraine, the government would give them out to each person, Ukrainian citizen, and grandmothers didn't know what to do with them. So Alexei would buy them off for grain, for buckwheat. The steel workers, they also didn't know what to do with the certificates. He would trade it for a bottle of vodka each. And that way he got so many privatization certificates that he could afford to buy a steel mill. Now, I didn't have any American investors, but since I thought it was a good idea, I talked to Sergei about it, and he thought it was a good idea too. So we said, yeah, okay, let's become owners. Alexei rigged the auctions, he got rid of all of the competitors, and we won. That's how we became owners of the largest steel mill in Ukraine. That's how we became billionaires. It was an accident. Interviewing all kinds of interesting guys who came in from Chechnya, from Serbia, real killers. Continuing with Steel Barons, Chapter 16. How we hired our own personal army of mercenaries. Well, 3 weeks after we bought our factory, all the top management didn't show up for work. They all called in sick on the same day. Accountants, the director, all the deputy directors called in sick. Now, we found out later that they weren't sick. They were being approached by racketeers as a first step in raiding. Raiding is when bandits come to take away your factory. And Sergei and I thought, look, we got to put together our own army. We can't just sit here. How do we get those guys? We need guys with guns who can blow up things at remote distances. We need professionals. And it wasn't so difficult to get professionals as we thought. Sergei knew this general who was retired, and this general put together for us an army of real professionals. All we had to do was pay him $5,000 a month. We gave him the use of a black Mercedes and a bodyguard, and he would drive around with a chauffeur all over town happy. He wasn't retired anymore. He was doing something useful. In exchange, he set up interviews for me and Sergei, interviewing all kinds of interesting guys who came in from Chechnya, from Serbia, real killers. And then we chose the guys that we liked. So, I don't know, it turned out to be pretty good at the end. We weren't worried about racketeers anymore. What we left behind were not ruins, just flat ground. How do you like our employees, Continuing with Steel Barons, Chapter 17, Interviewing the Killers. Well, the general did set up for me and Sergei interviews, and we did go through a week of interviewing them, and it was a very strange mix of people. And some of them were just cold-hearted mercenaries who would do anything for a buck. Others were just crazy. All of them were dangerous. They were all professional killers. So sitting there, I couldn't believe what I heard, some of the things they were saying. It was like, okay, let me just read to you word for word transcript of one guy. His name is Stas Melnichenko. This is Chapter 17. You can find it there. Specialization, hand-to-hand combat, plus an experienced sniper, which is rare. Position, bodyguard. And see, me asking, so tell us about yourself. What did you do in Yugoslavia? He said, same thing everyone else did. We went into the villages and shot the Muslims in the name of preserving the Serbian unity. And then I said, so you ended up in Chechnya, and what exactly did you do there? He says, same thing as in Yugoslavia. We would surround the villages, nobody could leave, we blocked off the main road. Then we approached any house and I would fire inside. If anybody jumped out, I mowed them down. The guys behind me would torch their bodies with flamethrowers to get rid of the evidence. We moved through house to house, village to village, throwing grenades into basements, burning everything in sight. At one train station, we hung 10 high school kids then 6 more students that were hiding inside the school. We chained the door and torched it. What we left behind were not ruins, just flat ground. How do you like our employees, you know? On the other hand, these are exactly the kind of people you want protecting you. So it's kind of like making a double deal, but we were all right with it. At least we kept our factory. There's an old saying in criminal terms: if a thief can steal and keep, it belongs to the thief. If a thief can steal and cannot keep, the thief must relinquish it. The Steel Barons, Chapter 19, How Raiding Works. For us, hiring a personal army of mercenaries was actually a very good idea and very timely, because raiding was taking place all around us. Everybody's factories were being raided and taken. And this is how raiding works in real life. First, you need to have a corrupt judge who will issue a wrong decision for you that you pay for. Then you need to have a bunch of guys with masks and guns, your enforcers, who run into that factory and based on that judge's orders, take over everything. They take out accounting documents, they take out corporate documents, they take out the company seal, everything that's in the safe, and then they sell this factory to somebody else because they are temporary real owners. And real owner is going to go to courts, will spend their years. By the time real owner wins, and he will win because it was a corrupt decision, the factory has been sold many times over to new buyers. They're good faith purchaser for values. And that's why you lose a factory very quickly if you don't have your own army. There's an old saying in criminal terms: if a thief can steal and keep, it belongs to the thief. If a thief can steal and cannot keep, the thief must relinquish it. And when it comes to privatization, we're all kind of thieves. We're all participated. You never fuck with a lawyer or his fee. Never. Continuing with Steel Barons, Chapter 18, a debt collection case. I remember one day an Austrian gentleman, Herr Huber, came over to my office because I had a debt collection matter. Apparently he sent $300,000 worth of ball bearings to Ukrainian father and son team, and they refused to pay, and he wanted his money back. And I said to him, okay, I take 50%, 150,000, and he agreed because he had no other choice. So then I called Sasha. Sasha went over to speak with father and the son, and they said that no, Herr Huber is a con artist. He sent them defective ball bearings, useless, and that's why they refused to pay. Well, our job wasn't to question whether they were useful or not. We're just there to take the money. So they didn't have the money, and Sasha kidnapped the son. He used him as a collateral that they would return the money later. He drove him to the forest, tied him to a tree, and left him sitting there for a day until the father could collect the money. The next morning, I get a phone call from Herr Huber saying, Herr Parker, we don't have to do this anymore. I don't owe you. The father agreed to pay everything. And I said, Herr Huber, it may be, but he agreed to pay because I was the one who did the job for you. And he said, yeah, but I had no agreement with you, Herr Parker. Therefore, I will not pay anything. Well, that was kind of bad. You know, you don't screw with the lawyer and his fee. So Sasha came back actually later on with the money. He went to the father, he exchanged the son for all the money, and he had the 300,000. So I figured, you know, if Herr Huber wanted to cheat us, which is a bad thing to do, then we should cheat him back, which is a good thing to do. Sasha kept 150,000, I kept my 150,000, and Herr Huber never bothered to call back because he knew who he was dealing with. Just goes to show you, you never fuck with a lawyer or his fee. Never. When they would come in, they would check in their guns, they would check in their grenades very politely, they would receive number for each item, and when they would leave, they would get the grenades back. Well, continuing with Steel Barons, Chapter 23, Sergei's Casinos. In a way, Sergei turned out to be a genius at making money out of thin air. You know, he would start up businesses out of the blue. He had a little bit of money from the steel business, so naturally he opened up a casino. And the casino was on the river. It's called River Palace. And I remember he invited me on an opening night. It was something to behold. All kinds of people went in there, and most of them were bandits, low-level bandits who committed hits on the behalf of their bosses. Really colorful group of people. And they're different gangs, but they knew better than to mess around in this particular casino because of Sergei's reputation with the security. So nobody would cause trouble there. In fact, when they would come in, they would check in their guns, they would check in their grenades very politely, they would receive number for each item, and when they would leave, they would get the grenades back. Because God forbid if they wouldn't get back, then all of a sudden they would be lobbed at the boat and the boat would go down. In other words, it was a very, very interesting place, that casino. Still works, you know, you should go and see it. If you have the money, you can afford everything. Continuing with Steel Barons, chapter 29, my day out on the boat with Roman Abramovich. I can still remember that day. It's unforgettable. I don't even know how he knew who I was, but he reached out to me, invited me. I flew into Nice, and then his helicopter picked me up and delivered me to his boat. It wasn't a boat, it was a ship. It was an enormous ship for one person. And I sat with him upstairs on the deck, and he was talking about things that are to him normal, like buying a Chelsea football team and investing into Formula One racing, all these things. And I was amazed at the scenery, at the fresh air. And then he took me downstairs to his office. I looked around, and all of the paintings that were there, it was world class. It was Van Gogh, Cézanne, it was Kandinsky, it was Picasso, it was everything that you would see in museums. And so I asked him, I said, are those real? And he says to me, of course. The problem is to find it good enough of copies to give back to the museums as replacements. That was the problem. And I looked at it and I said, this is something that I can totally see myself doing. Everything I saw, it made perfect sense to me. After you buy all of the cars, and after you buy all the mansions, and then come private helicopters, then come football teams, airplanes, it's a progression of what you want to accomplish. It's the priorities that are there. So the moral of the story, I guess, is if you have the money, you can afford everything. So the moral of the story, I guess, is if you have some cash, and you have Sergei's brains, you can start any business without lifting a finger. Continuing with Steel Barons, chapter 25, Sergei's new business, diamonds, rubies, emeralds. He invited me one time to his business club. He opened up a business club for members only, and he showed me things that I've never seen before in my life. There were 3 trays, red, green, and white. On the red tray were rubies from Burma. On the white, there was Sierra Leone diamonds, blood diamonds, that were polished to perfection. Green, it was emeralds from Colombia. Sergei would send people there to buy out raw stones. He would import them here without any duties. They would polish them off at a factory in Ukraine. Certificate of registration then was in Ukraine. It was no longer blood diamonds from Sierra Leone. It was a Ukrainian product. And then he would take the diamonds, for example, and he would export them to Antwerpen. He would sell them to Hasids, and the Hasidic Jews would love to buy them because they would make such a markup on these stones. In other words, he got into jewelry business. He gave me a few emeralds because, you know, my mom likes them, and I gave it to her. But I just didn't know what to do with all these stones, so I never went into the business with him. You know? But that's the kind of a guy he was. So the moral of the story, I guess, is if you have some cash, and you have Sergei's brains, you can start any business without lifting a finger. Jesus, you should have seen that guy. Continuing with Steel Barons, chapter 30, Bandits in the Forest. I remember when Sasha invited me to his birthday party. He was turning 33 years old, same age as Jesus Christ when they crucified him. And he had a party in the forest, a barbecue party, and he invited me and all of his friends. And I remember showing up there. It was a really interesting sight because it was a guy who was, you know, turning pig on a spit, roasting it, and they had another spit, and he was turning a lamb on there for different guests, different flavors. And Sasha was introducing me to all different guests. One of the guests he introduced me to was David, and David looked like a thug. I mean, he was dressed like in a sports costume, and he looked like a bandit, broken nose, And then Sasha explained to me that in fact he was a bandit. He was recently released from prison to become overseer of Odessa ports. Apparently the previous overseer was shot. He was jogging with his dogs in the morning. A couple of guys jumped out of the bushes and mowed them down with his machine guns. The dogs lived, but the guy didn't. So they had to spring a new guy from prison, criminal, to make sure that all the docks are in order. You know, supervisor, really, really nasty looking guy. So Sasha explained to me that he just got sprung, so he's undergoing his, normalization process, socialization process, so don't pay attention to him. But I stayed away from him for the entire duration of the party. Jesus, you should have seen that guy. Maybe Sasha's friends weren't so bad after all. Continuing, Steel Barons, chapter 30, Bandits in the Forest. It's about Sasha's birthday party, and he was introducing me to all kinds of people there. And one guy he introduced me to, really strange guy, Vadim. He looked drunk, but he wasn't. He was crying. And I didn't know what it was, but when I sat down, he just started telling me this out of the top of his head. He says, "We were patrolling the streets like we always do. And that's when we spotted him, the darky. He was from the mountains, Azerbaijani or something. So we stopped off to see if we can get some money. But he was smiling at us like strangely. And so we punched him a few times to make sure he understood. But he didn't say anything. He didn't offer us any cash. So we dumped him into the wagon and drove him over to the police station, chained him to the battery, and went upstairs, had a few shots of vodka, came down. Sergeant beat the shit out of him so he understood where he was at. But he was still smiling at us weird. And that's when it occurred to me, he wasn't going to give us any money because he was slow mentally. He was retarded. He didn't know anything. But by that time, it was already too late. Sergeant beat the shit out of him again, and we left him there lying in blood, and we couldn't let him go anymore. It was too late by that time. And that's what Vadim was crying about. When he told me this story, I looked at him like a completely different human being. I mean, Jesus Christ, this guy had conscience. He felt guilty about something. Maybe Sasha's friends weren't so bad after all. This was like the worst you could possibly come up with. Damn it, our money. Continuing with Steel Barons, Chapter 32, Problems of the Rich and Famous. Well, Sergei called me and he invited me to join him for a conversation at Pirvak. And Pirvak is a great Ukrainian restaurant, and it specializes in vodka. Even its name is a first runoff of moonshine is what it means. So the first 4 pages are different vodka. There's pepper vodka, there's milk-based vodka, cucumber vodka, horseradish vodka, anyway, Sergei likes that place because of that. So we sat down, and he told me the good news first. The good news is the Anti-Monopoly Committee approved our purchase of other 2 steel mills, and now we have a vertically integrated system. We can get the actual steel out of the ground, we can make it into the product, we can export it out, we can do everything ourselves. The bad news is the government wanted to know what was happening to all of the money. Where did it go? Where did our product go? Well, we weren't going to tell them the truth, but it means we had to now show some profit. We had to pay some taxes. We had to keep some money in the country, less in our offshore accounts, which was terrible news for us. This was like the worst you could possibly come up with. Damn it, our money. But we had no choice. Showing a little profit, I guess, never hurt anybody. That's how they killed him, in the face. Continuing with Steel Barons. Chapter 35, how they came to kill us. Well, it finally happened. They killed Sasha in the elevator. He was going home, he stepped in, a little girl came in to join him in the elevator. When she got out on her floor, she turned around, pointed her little fist with a gun in his face, and pulled the trigger. That's how they killed him, in the face. I found out about it from Sergei the next morning. I didn't know. He told me, stay indoors, cover all the lights, don't turn anything on, shutters, just stay until we pull you out. General's men are outside guarding you. So I did. Now, Kyiv is a very small town in some ways. So our guys found them that same night, and it turned out that it was Chechens. There was 3 separate groups of Chechens. They were really well organized. They had 5 different cars. That's why we didn't spot them right away, interchanging. And they came to kill us on the orders of Oleg Deripaska, the Russian fucking oligarch who we threw away his application when we were getting our factories from privatization. He never forgot. He sent them to us, bastard. Well, we kept them for a while. That's why I quit this business. The end has come. Continuing with Steel Barons, Chapter 37, the end has arrived. Personally, I always thought that it's not life that matters. It's the quality of life. And Oscar Wilde once said it well, one must live well to know what living is. That's why I decided to get out of the steel mill business. After Sasha was killed, I realized that now I will need to travel with bodyguards no matter where I go. If I go to Caribbean on vacation, bodyguards. If I go to Bora Bora, bodyguards. Who needs that life? Looking over your shoulder every time to see who's going to come to kill you? And Sergei thought the same thing, especially after he received a phone call from Moscow from Deripaska. The bastard found out his phone number. cell phone number somehow. And he called to say the following: release all of our Chechens and the girl, and sign over all of your factories to my name. In exchange, I will pay you $2 billion each in any account anywhere in the world in cash. If you don't, I will continue to pursue my business in Ukraine. Now, we all knew what that meant. On the one hand, our factories were worth a lot more than $2 billion each. On the other hand, how much money do you really need in life to live well? Plus, do you really want a war with Russians or the Chechens? Sergei planned to retire in some spot under the warm sun, and me too. I was also thinking of going somewhere nice. Why not? Get a boat, get a helicopter, get some paintings. The end has arrived, but a new beginning is also open. That's why I quit this business. The end has come. It's better to be young, healthy, and rich than old, sick, and poor. Steel Barons, Chapter 39, Sergei's mansion in San Francisco. Well, Sergei wasn't joking about retiring under some palm tree somewhere. He bought himself a palace in Tiburon, in San Francisco, overlooking the Golden Gate, overlooking the San Francisco Bay, the Alcatraz with the little white boats and sailboats in the background on the hill. It was beautiful. It was something. So he invited me to come over. I went there, and it was something. He showed me his car collection, and he doesn't even drive. He doesn't have a license. But it was like a red Ferrari. There was a Bentley, a silver Bentley from the 1960s. There was a Land Cruiser, and there was all kinds of like two-seater sports cars that I never even heard of, like Bugatti, something like this. And it was really impressive to see. And then we just spent the rest of the afternoon by his pool, and his servants were bringing him Bloody Marys. You know, I had a couple gin tonics. It was a wonderful, wonderful evening. And then the next day, he took me on his yacht out of the Golden Gate Bridge, and then we went fishing for salmon. So his captain brought everything, all the fishing poles, everything. So I caught a salmon. It was lucky. And then when we made it home that night, we had the freshest sashimi in the world. It was really something to behold. I loved being there. I really loved seeing him again. I mean, I'm glad that he settled okay, you know? But I never had any doubts. That's Sergei for you. The moral of the story, I guess, it's better to be young, healthy, and rich than old, sick, and poor. If you can't pay, you can't play. That is the rule. Steel Barons. It's a book about corruption. And the key question in corruption is, where does it begin? Who starts it? Is it the businessman who gives the bribe, or is it the government official who extracts it? Well, I'm a businessman who worked in this area for 30 years. I know all about corruption. And I'll tell you, no reasonable businessman would ever voluntarily part with his hard-earned cash just to pay off some government bureaucrat if the bureaucrat didn't extract it. If you can't pay, you can't play. That is the rule. In each year, the bribes become more and higher and higher. Why? Because government bureaucrats know that sooner or later they'll be retired. They won't be working anymore. And then all of their bribes will stop forever. So they're trying to make as much as they can before they retire. So in the early 90s, it became apparent to me that this systematic system of corruption, if it's not eradicated, if it's not switched from the Sicilian path to the normal path, at some point it'll be too late. You won't be able to correct it anymore. It's like cancer eating up a body. If you don't fight with cancer cells, the body will die. And that's what we have. How can you eradicate corruption when it's the single most profitable form of business around here? Hi, I wrote this book, Steel Barons. It's about corruption. I've been in steel business for more than 30 years here in Ukraine. I know all about corruption. And some people accuse me of perpetuating corruption in this society, but I strongly disagree. It wasn't me. This country, developing nation of Ukraine, was always for the taking to begin with. If it wasn't me, some other oligarch would step into my shoes and he would do exactly the same thing, or maybe even worse. Some people say I'm a bandit just because we have a small little army of mercenaries behind us, but they're also wrong. That's not correct. I am not a bandit. Unlike the bandits or government officials, I never raided any factories, I never had anybody killed, I never muscled anybody, nothing. It was just purely for self-protection, although I easily could have. I am not a bandit. At worst, I am a participant in the so-called shadow economy. Like millions of other Ukrainians, I am one of them. In my defense, it's not a big crime to transfer money that you earn from your account to your own offshore account and not pay taxes. And taxes paid to whom? To the nebulous concept of government? The government officials themselves demand their bribes to be wired to offshore accounts or paid here in cash. Who gets punished? Nobody. Nobody goes to jail in this country. Nothing happens to anybody. How can you eradicate corruption when it's the single most profitable form of business around here? People come to you and they say, cars have accidents, lightnings strike, you have a wife, think about it. I wrote a book about corruption and banditism called The Steel Barons. Because when I arrived to Kyiv in '91, everything was just beginning. Soviet Union collapsed, there was no more funding for the athletes from state budget, so all of the athletes, boxers, wrestlers, kickboxers, ballerinas, they all turned to racket. They all knew each other. What's racket, you could say? It's extortion, backed up by professional muscle. For protections at the end of the month that you gotta pay. People come to you and they say, cars have accidents, lightnings strike, you have a wife, think about it. And then you're stuck. You gotta get somebody to talk on your behalf. And you don't send any athletes to talk on your behalf because they're all part of the same gang. You gotta go to the government. Government will fight for you. And that's why I always like dealing with alpha guys. That's why our army consists of alpha guys. They're not bandits. Now, each neighborhood in Kyiv has their own family, bandits. And each family controls that rayon. In Starokyivsky rayon, it was Savlokhov brigades, Boris, Ruslan Savlokhov, wrestling coaches. So they had really strong wrestlers behind them. But then in 1994, President Kuchma came to power. And that's when bandits stopped to exist. You know what happened with them? They all became government. That's why there's no more racket and mafia in Ukraine. Hi. This is my book, The Steel Barons. It's about corruption, banditism in the early 1990s in Kyiv, Ukraine. And since then, everything has changed. There's no more mafia. There's no more racketeers. That's because in 1994, President Kuchma, when he came to power, he sent gray-haired KGB emissaries to all of the heads of the racket families, in Kyiv at least. And he said, stop all your strong-arming activities. They're simply incompatible. Your Sicilian path cannot continue to coexist with our efforts to change Ukraine into a European nation. So, stop what you're doing and then you can continue to live. If you cannot, leave the country. If you cannot leave the country, we will kill you. That was the message. And that's exactly what happened. Some families couldn't stop strong arming. They were imprisoned, heads were killed. Other people left Ukraine, like Savlokhov brigades. The Savlokhov brothers went to New York, but in New York they already had their own mafia in Brighton Beach. They already had this Yaponchik guy, and they had FBI hunting after everybody. It was non-competitive. They couldn't survive out there. So they came back to Kyiv, Kuchma put them into prison and killed them both Boris and Ruslan. So that's how it ended for them. And the rest of the guys who had brains, they stopped strong-arming and they became part of the government. Parliament deputies, members of the City Hall Council, anti-corruption committee members, customs committee, police. So in other words, they all became government. That's why there's no more racket and mafia in Ukraine.
Chicago, what we need, the Lord will give us. All we want, we'll carry with
us. Some people ask me, Jack, you're an American in Ukraine, you own a steel mill, dangerous business. Do you carry your own guns on you? Do you have any weapons? And I say, no, I can't. In Ukraine, it's against the law for Americans or any foreigner to carry weapons. So no, I don't. But then again, what are laws and rules when your life depends on it, right?
I like my town with a little drop of poison. Nobody knows they're lining up to go insane.